weapons.
Our weapons will give them an
That's a
edge.
bullshit plan. You're talking about the Russian army here. They come at you with brute force, which means strength in numbers and heavy armor. Are your men ready for that?
Okay, guys, so one thing I want to talk about the Soviet Afghan War, something that a lot of people don't know about, and that is that the Soviet Union killed 20 times more civilians in 10 years than the US did in 20 years. That is not an exaggeration. If you do not believe me, you can Google this. Google this. How many civilians did the Soviets kill in Afghanistan? You will be absolutely shocked at the number. So when the US occupied Afghanistan between 2001 and, August of 2021, almost 20 years, close to it, the US killed between 40 to 60,000 civilians. That's at least most records that I've seen. And that's horrible also. Don't get me wrong. And some numbers are, up to 100,000 to the higher, estimates. But most estimates I've seen is between 40 to 60,000 civilians they've killed in 20 years. How many civilians did the Soviets kill in 10 years between 1979 and 1989? Between 1 to 2 million civilians. So even if you take the low number of 1 million civilians that the Soviets killed and you compare that to the US, the Soviets killed 20 times more civilians in half the time, in 10 years, versus the US in 20 years. So why did the Soviets kill so many civilians, compared to the US? Simple reason, it's because the Soviets did not care about human life as much as the United States did. The Soviet Union would use fear tactics, collective punishment in Afghanistan. So in Afghanistan, if there was like a 1 or 2 Mujahideen fighters from a village, the Soviets would raise that entire village. So if there was like 1 or 2 fighters hiding in a village, they would blow up the entire village, call in heavy artillery. They would, use napalm, they did use napalm in that war, call in jets, burn the entire village down. They would send in the Hinds, the attack helicopters, and just raise the entire village to the ground, killing everyone, men, women, children. Everybody in the village would be killed. That is how the Soviets occupied Afghanistan, with brutal fear tactics. There's this movie called Charlie Wilson's War. It's not about the Soviet Afghan War, but there's one scene in the movie which actually shows Soviet Hinds and how they were actually murdering, killing civilians in those villages. But that's what the Soviets did. It was a terror campaign in Afghanistan. Take a look at this right here on the screen. This is the PFM-1 mine, also known as the butterfly mine, and this is one of the most evil weapons the Soviets used. This was a mine that was dropped actually from helicopters and planes. So they would fly over, villages and, areas in Afghanistan, and they dropped millions of these in Afghanistan, millions. The mine will basically spin, and as it hits the ground, it gets placed. And the mine is actually bright green colored. And a lot of children, they would find this bright green thing in the ground, and they would think, oh, it's a toy, and they would pick it up, and they would get blown up. And this weapon was notorious for killing thousands of Afghan children alone. When the United States was in Afghanistan, we did not use anti-personnel mines. The United States did not do stuff like that. So maybe the United States should not have been in Afghanistan. You could definitely make that argument. But to suggest that the Soviet Union was less worse than the US learned from Vietnam, learned from a lot of the bad things we did in Vietnam, like, Rolling Thunder, and also we, Agent Orange, and we cared much more about civilian life in Afghanistan than the Soviets ever did. So say what you want about the US, but we didn't terrorize people like the Soviets did in Afghanistan.